All right. Well, welcome back to Resisting Pretense. We're laughing because we just recorded a whole podcast without hitting the record button. So this is take two of having a faith-infused conversation about, or no, having an honest conversation about a life of faith in modern culture. And the end result will be maybe you have a faith-infused conversation with someone.
We'll clean that up in post.
That's our new name for the pod. I'm exploring alternative names instead of resisting pretense. Maybe it's just we'll fix that in post.
Fix that in post.
Yeah. There's probably already a podcast called that. I don't know. Now I want to know. Can I look it up? Why don't you talk while I
You
look that
can
up?
do whatever you want. You are the lead pastor. I just say yes, sir.
Whatever.
You know. Actually, that's kind of funny that we talk about that way, because that's really the direction we're talking about today in today's episode is really about leadership, styles and trends, and kind of where we've landed or where we are landing in our leadership style here at Stone Ridge Church. And so um, kind of an exciting conversation, to be honest, as we talk about leadership. So here, Tom is just messing around on his iPad. If you saw us on the video, he's scanning to figure out if there's a podcast by that name.
There is. I was right. Fix it in post. I don't know if it's an active one or not, but all right. Makes me happy just to know that I had an idea that somebody else thought was good.
So when we started this conversation,
I'm sorry, were you talking?
Yeah. So when we started this conversation in the unrecorded podcast, we really started talking about how we came into, or what trend we kind of came into in the leadership styles, and talking about the different styles like authoritarian and laissez-faire and collaborative and those kinds of things. And that when I started, it was much more the authoritative, coming out of the almost the 3 martini lunch, I am the boss era of business, and really coming much more into the good old boys club.
Yeah.
Into this is the way we're going. And you kind of talked about General Patton as kind of having that authoritative.
That's what when I think of like my early pictures of leadership, it was the General Patton was like the icon of strong, hard charging leadership. And and I think of there were, that was the pinnacle, really. And those were the leaders that I first experienced. My first role in ministry was under a leader that was a very like strong, dominant, hard charging, lots of ambition. And he wasn't authoritarian in the cruel sense, but he was very like, he was the guy with the plan and you were going to follow it. And we did. And I never thought of myself as a leader. I only thought of myself as a guy who could support a leader. And it took a while for me to open my thinking up to actually taking leadership roles, because I never thought I was cut out of that cloth.
Well, and that kind of style really came across as it's my way or the highway. And so you almost lived in this atmosphere of, I better toe the line, or if I don't, I'm going to be out of a job.
Mhm.
And so it was almost an underlying fear in some ways. And that was kind of where I was coming into the business world. It was moving its way out as I was coming in, and that trend began to give way to more of the servant leadership
Yeah.
style.
I think there was before we jump totally into servant leaders, there was a real, I think one of the values of that driven, authoritative kind of leadership, um, there was a real focus on results,
Mhm.
um, and on being results oriented, results driven. I think about guys, and I don't know actually what his personal leadership style, but he was just in that season where, he was highly praised. Lee Iacocca was for a while in American culture like the epitome of great leadership,
Yeah.
and he turned around a company or two, and he was, um I from a distance I always thought he was kind of like that guy that had the plan and was gonna throw the team on his back and carry him across the finish line. That kind of leader. And he may have been more collaborative than that, but it was just my impression from the distance of where I was looking, and it was just the culture of leadership at the time that
Well,
that's what leaders do.
and I think in that kind of leadership, you never have to worry about where you're going. I mean, it's always very clear this is where the leader is going, and we need to go in that same direction. And
Right.
that wasn't always true in all styles of leadership, but in that leadership, you always knew what was happening.
Right. And then the next season seemed to be kind of in the, I don't know, 80s, maybe late 80s, early 90s. This season where all of a sudden people started talking about, not just in church life, but people started talking in the wider culture about servant leadership. And this began to open. It wasn't even I don't think it was even the thing that finally tipped the scales for me as far as being able to see myself as a leader, but definitely it was a move in that direction, that we could talk about servant leadership and leadership, the leader being something other than that hard charging authoritative, like my way or the highway kind of leader. All of a sudden servant leaders had a more uh, compassionate approach, um, and maybe more collaborative. Uh, definitely in church life, I think there were a lot of people saying, "Finally, we're talking about we've had a lot of church leaders that were take charge my way or the highway," and then all of a sudden now we're like, "Wait a minute." That wasn't necessarily the only picture of leadership we have from like Jesus, who at times was pretty take charge, but at other times, washing his disciples' feet and and encouraging them to go out and lead on their own. And there was so much more servant in him than any other picture of leadership I'd ever seen.
Right. So my experience in that area was actually when I worked for Federal Express, and I was kind of it was a cross between working for Federal Express and working in long term care. I was kind of
Because they so
doing
relate
both
to each
jobs. Yeah,
other. Yeah.
exactly. But the CEO of Federal Express, a guy by the name of Frederick Smith, um, he actually would come and go to every one of his locations, and he would talk to the employees, and he would ask questions. And so,
And call me Freddie, kind of.
no, no, no. But
That's what I called him.
yeah, and we know how long that lasted. But I mean, it was just this example of I'm going to get down and know who my people are and be engaged with them and be able to encourage them. And um, that was my first experience of actually seeing that idea of servant leadership. It wasn't, it was something that if the job needs to get done and we don't have enough people, I jump in and help.
Hmm.
And so you saw that trickle down to where, even at the stations, if there was a problem, the director of the station was getting involved and helping out, not just sitting up at the top and barking orders.
Hmm.
They were on the line going, okay, this needs to get done, so I'm going to help get it done.
Yeah, when I think of the strong dominant leader, I think of a guy in an ivory tower corner office looking out over the cityscape, who's barking is probably the wrong phrase, but who's directing things from his office. When I think of the servant leader, I think of the guy that spends less time in the office, is rolling up his sleeves and knows the name of the male guy and knows
Right.
that kind of stuff.
Well, and it's almost an attitude, at least from my perspective in the authoritarian, that doing something that helps the company move in that direction, like if there's a need like that, that's below me.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my. Where in the servant leadership, it was like, no, I am part of this, and so I need to be
Yeah.
engaged.
And there's a case to be made. I'm trying to respect the different modes of leadership, but there's a case to be made of the authoritarian leader would say, "I'm going to do the thing that only I can do," um, and I think the servant leader would say, um, "I'm going to do mostly the things that only I can do, but I also have to be accessible and to support people around me." So there was definitely a shift in the trend
Oh,
of
absolutely.
leadership. Um, and then the next shift I remember was the team shift. And it was almost less about leadership, although there were leadership elements to it, and more about an overall approach to business and how we do business. And I remember reading stuff by a guy named Deming. Can't remember his first name, Arthur maybe, but anyway. And I remember like people were geeking out about Japanese businesses and how they were doing teams, and the team, particularly in like a factory setting, a team like a shift team would work together, and even like who's leading the team and who's getting maybe even promoted or fired or whatever was all based on the team, because they either succeeded or failed as a team. And so if there was dead weight, they were going to address it themselves, and it became this model of how you do stuff, and maybe worked better in some industries than others, but for a while it was the buzz.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'm part of the project team, and there would be a particular project that they were working on, and they may not work on any other project in the company, and so there was like this season for that team to work, and then when
Mm-hmm.
that season was over, they might get transferred into a different team, but you're always connected somehow to a team.
Yeah. And even in church life, that was the time when many churches stopped talking about committees. um, Church, for decades, churches have been populated by a committee that meets and makes a decision, and a lot of churches said, we're not going to do committees anymore. We're going to do teams, and it's the team that's deciding is going to be the team that executes. And so it's not like a committee deciding what other people will do, but it's the team in control of their own decision making process and the execution of their decisions. And some people just change the language without changing the structure. Like you're not the personnel committee anymore. You're the personnel team, but it's still a committee. Uh,
Which was always, when I came on staff here at Stone Ridge, that was one of the things I had to learn, because I was still kind of in we have these
oh,
committee
you had to shift
roles.
language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I had to understand why the shift. It wasn't just a matter of shifting language; it was a matter of understanding the paradigm shift as well. And so it was made very clear to me that committees tell somebody what they have to do, teams explore what we have to do. And so everybody has a buy-in on a team,
Mm-hmm.
where on a committee, it's like, okay, we've decided what you're going to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And at least that was how it was kind of explained to me.
Yeah. So there was that season where team and teamwork, and that was all the rage. I think that was also a time when a lot of, particularly tech organizations, but I think probably a variety of organizations, tried to flatten their organizational charts a lot and remove middle management as much as possible, and create these flat structures where everybody's got a voice, everybody has input, and you can go directly to the CEO, or I I saw I don't know if it's a caricature or if it's a good representation of that, in a TV show I was watching. It's called For All Mankind. It's on Apple, but um, and it was this fictional tech company that was in part of the space race, and when they're making a big decision, the CEO walks out, all right, everybody gather around, and all these people kind of gather around in a big circle, and they have a conversation about a big decision they have to make. I don't know if that's what it's really like in those organizations, but uh, there's definitely part of the team movement was to to keep decision making in the hands of the doers.
Yeah,
Uh,
very much so.
yeah.
And to a certain extent, I mean, and every one of these aspects have their good and their
Yeah. Yeah.
you know struggles. I think in one of especially in the team aspect, is that we said, oh, let's put all these people together in a team, but we really didn't understand team dynamics at that point.
Hmm.
And so, you know,
Tried to force a lot of
we
teams to
tried to
happen.
force a lot of teams, and people would start rolling their eyes when they say, "Oh, we're going to do a team building exercise."
Trust
Like,
fall. Yeah.
yeah,
Trust
ugh.
fall is the caricature of the team season.
Yeah, it's like, I don't want and um, but what we learned was that you couldn't just throw a bunch of people together and expect there to be a team. Especially if there was underlying feelings or opinions or things that needed to come to the surface for the team to really gel. And so I think that season of team building really taught us a lot about the human condition and how we have to learn to work on some of that stuff.
Yeah. So the next season that I thought of, and I'm gonna stick a couple together, but we'll probably talk about them separately. But it was like the strategy and marketing season after teams. Um, Somewhere here in the 2000s, it seems like that became a big conversation. Let's talk about the marketing side of it. This was, um, I think, in the early days of the marketing shift, it was all about um, refining your demographic, and it was all about uh, looking into the numbers and being able to custom market to certain segments, and to adjust your business plan based on you know yeah. I think you were talking about um today how we see this in like people wanting to track your activity in an app so they know how to market specifically to you. Like you searched for something on Google and it shows up in your Facebook because they're talking to each other, and you're like, you were looking for cat litter in Google and you open up, some other app and it's got an ad for cat litter, and you're like, how do it know?
Well, and technology is really what has driven that.
Yeah.
So when prior to the computer and all that kind of stuff, companies would have to wait sometimes months
See if their marketing
to
was
see if their
successful.
marketing was successful or not. And so, by the time they figured out what was trending, the trend was over.
Yeah.
When we really started to step into the computer age and the technology age, then we begin to see things like Salesforce, which was a program that
Hmm.
it tracked how many calls did you make, how many customers did you talk to, what was the outcome of those customers, what is your follow up, when are you going to follow up, what was their response, and all of this was being tracked not just in your program that you were putting it in, but then it was being tracked by somebody at the corporate level who could see all of the stuff and see it trending. Now, I have a niece who works in statistics, and very rarely have I run into anybody who likes statistics. But
She's the one.
she's the one. She's one of them. But there are positions in advertising companies and in companies, well-paid positions, that's all they do, is they look at the statistics of the market and they see where things are going and why things are happening and I mean, down to the most minute details of saying, if this ad comes out on a Tuesday, it's going to do better than it comes out on a Wednesday, or
Mhm.
if this ad hits at 8 o'clock on Saturday mornings, that's when most women are viewing Facebook or viewing this or viewing that. And so we want to make sure that's in front of them during that time. You know, even to the point now where I do, and you and I've talked about this, that we do a lot of our shopping online and then go pick it up.
Yeah.
Well, I'm ordering my stuff, and they said, "Well, how was your bananas?" Or I noticed that you haven't bought this in a while. Is it time to replace that? Or, you know, even my haircut. They're saying, "Oh, you haven't been in. It must be time for you to get your haircut." And you know, I I'm one of those guys that I get my haircut when it starts driving me crazy. But they have figured out that,
What your crazy
yeah, what
period
is my
is? Yeah.
crazy period is, and
Yeah,
goes,
most of us have figured that out about you. Um, yeah, I always think it's funny when I do a lot of my grocery ordering online, and then we go pick it up, and always it'll be, my list of things that I ordered, and then below that, the list of things they're gonna suggest that I often order. And it seems like there's always bananas in there.
oh
It's
yeah,
always bananas.
always bananas.
So, um, yeah, and marketing used to be like you could assess it after the fact. And then I remember a phrase like just in time, like getting the information just in time. And then that changed to in real time. And now you're like the gap between your effort and assessing its results is becoming so narrow. Um, and this affects leadership, I think, in the way, especially now with the advent of social media, that the leader is kind of expected to be aware and involved and be part of the marketing voice, even if it's somebody on staff doing it in the leader's name. But like the leader needs to be tweeting about, oh, we just launched this new service, this new product, and it's and there's this expectation of leaders being an integral part of the marketing effort.
Yeah, so I think that even um, even at the CEO role or the governor role or whatever it is, they may do um, some of their own public stuff, like as far as tweeting or Instagram or something like that, but they never do any of the follow up.
Hmm.
They may send it out, but there's somebody else who's tracking all of that stuff and
Little
looking at all of that stuff. And
social media monkeys.
yeah, I mean, yeah, literally is that they don't.
Literally monkeys?
Well, seems like it, you know. And so I'm always fascinated when you see some of these big stars say, "Oh, I answer all my own tweets," and I'm just kind of like, "No, you don't. You have somebody who's looking at that." And when one comes along, they go to you, "Hey, just want to let you know about this one," and you go, "Oh, I'll respond to that one."
Right. So there's the marketing side and there's the strategy side, and they're related because marketing is informing strategy. But when I think strategy, I'm thinking about the whole movement among leaders to refine and restate things like um, your organization's mission and its vision for where it's going in the next 5 to 10 years. And of course, I think branding is a kind of an in-between space from marketing and strategy, because a lot of times you know i'm I'm hearing people say, oh, this is our brand identity, which might really be almost an expression of our values and our identity and the things that we're trying to accomplish. And then and the brand is both visual and it's value oriented, but it also says, and this is how we're going to expand our brand over the next season of our business life. And then it's talking about products and services and different things, but it's all part of this larger conversation of a strategy. It's connected to marketing, but it's also its own thing. And that has become um, I think that's a current season that we're in. Maybe the tail end of its popularity, or like its newness. Like it's not new, but for a long time, nobody was telling me as a church leader, what you're in the 80s and probably even in the 90s, what are your organizational values? What's your mission statement? Where's your vision taking you in the next 10 years? And then somewhere in the 2000s, that became something that I was hearing a lot of. What's your strategic piece? Not just for your organization, but for you personally. We did that here just a few years ago. Refined our, like, what are the values that drive us? How do we say concisely what our mission is? And you know, our vision, our mission remains the same, but our vision that over the next 5-10 years, we're gonna help people discover their calling. We're gonna help them live that out, and we're gonna see them influencing the world around them because of that. So those things, um, in a lot of ways, really helpful for us as a church, and I think it's helped a lot of businesses be very focused.
So, if you were to give an example that our listeners would probably be able to relate to, what business would you say? Here's a clear picture of what that might have looked like.
There's Tom's Shoes. We've talked about. I mentioned it in a sermon recently that had they had a mission to that wasn't just making money, but it was to put shoes on the feet of the poorest people in the world. So they would sell a pair of shoes and then give a pair of shoes, and they've actually changed their model in recent years, and now they give a portion, like a percentage of their profit, to shoe the world. That sounds strange. Go away, world. But they give they're a charity oriented, a philanthropic kind of corporation. That's one that I think people were pretty aware of when it hit its popularity.
Well, and I think that carried over to a lot of different aspects. So when you were talking about that, I think about how many stars say, I'm going to throw my platform behind
Oh yeah,
whatever
this
it is,
cause,
and
that
so
cause, yeah.
right, and so, oh, this person, this famous singer is connected to the ASPCA or whatever it might be, and so there's, it's that identity that's connected. It's not just the company, but now the company is connected to
Right.
whatever it is. I think about, and it's really kind of changed my perspective, but I think about Apple, because the computer world was really all about business and the business aspect, and IBM really ran in that lane. And when Apple really came on the scene, it was more like, how do we make you a part of this new technology? How do we get a computer into your hands?
Into every home.
How do we make it
Right.
personal? How do we make it your home? It was the same thing when iPod came out. You don't have to listen to somebody else's music. You can listen to your own music, and you can listen to hundreds. And it almost became this social aspect of, I don't own an Apple, I am Apple. And so when you talk to people, are you
Duh.
well, but are you Apple, or are you, are you Windows? Are you
Apple or Windows for a while, and then in the cell phone space, Apple or Android.
Apple or Android?
Yeah.
And still today, that social connection still defines,
Yeah.
kind of who you are. You're almost, oh, I'm an Apple person, and somebody who's not an Apple scowls at you and says you ought to be, strung up or whatever it looks like. And so, but the point being is that in that trend, we were looking at not just what you could do for me, but how do you make me a part of?
Yeah, and last year I was part of a leadership conference as a participant, and the whole thing was about clarifying your personal mission, vision, value. Like it was the same thing that organizations do, but just applied on a personal level. And I think that's where this really dovetails into leadership. And there's one more trend that we've talked about. That there's the empowerment trend. I call it the kumbaya trend. Like we want everyone to feel good and have a vote. It dovetails in. It's kind of a further expansion of the servant leader team oriented, but it's
return to the 60s.
Yeah, but it's this. We want to empower our leaders, and it's awesome. And it's not. It's easy to poke fun at, but there's also some we've adopted some of that mindset here, particularly when it comes to things like we made a change to our vacation policy. We have super dedicated employee, like they want to work for the church because they're passionate about their faith and they're passionate about the area of church life that they really want to invest in. And so I don't have to I don't have to motivate them to work. In a sense, I almost have to motivate them to take appropriate time off of work. So we changed gear. We used to track, you've got X amount of days and you've taken X amount of days. You have this many left. And a few years ago, we just said, forget it. Like, take the time you need and make sure your responsibilities are covered when you're gone. And let us know how that's all handled. And our staff, our full-time ministry staff, they manage their own time away, and they take enough to refresh themselves. They take enough to spend good time with their families. But I've never seen it abused yet, because they want to do their job. Like, they love their job, and so they don't just want to be on vacation all the time. And so but that's definitely an empowerment kind of minded, like I put control in their hands for
Well,
that. And
in a way, that was really handing over a level of trust to
right.
be able, I don't have to control that anymore. I believe that you are a grown person. You can trust, you know when you need time off, you know when you need to be here and working, and I don't I don't have to worry about it. So take that off your plate. You just let me know when you're leaving, so I'm not walking in one day and going, "Where's Scott?" You know. But I think that was a level of trust that empowered those employees.
Right.
And you know, like we talked earlier, I loved, and you named the hotel and I can't remember it again,
Oh, Ritz-Carlton.
but I loved that the
Great
Ritz
example.
Carlson would give their doormen, would give them a, a spending an account, for lack of a better word, that if a customer had a problem, they could just deal with it.
They empowered their people to
They
solve
empower,
problems. Yeah.
and they trusted their people to say, "I trust you to fix something, so you're you're not tied up.
Right.
People aren't tied up. The customer isn't sitting there waiting, going, okay, does this have to go to the CEO to get this meal comped?
Yeah.
You know, instead the doorman can go, you know what, you're right. We should have done that better. Let me take care of that for you."
Yeah. And their customer service ratings through the roof. They're yeah, a great example of empowering the workforce, and a trend in leadership that I think, all of this stuff, none of these are necessarily right or wrong. Even you go back to the where we started, coming full circle, like, there's a great time for authoritative, driven, hard charging leadership. There's certain settings where that's necessary, particularly in crisis types of settings. Like, you need that extreme level of clarity, and you need at times really fast decision making. That's the best way to do that. And all of these trends in leadership, it's not like you just throw out one, but what we've discovered here is we want to embrace the best out of all of them. And takes a leader with a different mindset in each of these trends.
Well, and I think part of this comes from really a strong understanding that we've developed over the years that everybody's a leader, but not everybody is the same kind of leader.
Hmm.
And that we have certain gifting in
I
each
still
one of
struggle with
us.
that. Like, that everyone's a leader. I'm like, aren't some of us followers?
Well, but we are followers to a certain extent. We have to be.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
Otherwise,
I agree. We're all at the very basic minimum, we're leaders of ourselves.
right.
But yeah.
Well, or as a parent, or as, if
Mm.
I were to look at, I was a much different leader than my dad was. My
Mm.
dad was much more of an
Me too.
authoritarian leader. I was probably much more of a probably a gatherer, caring type leader than my dad ever was. And it was how God wired us. My point being is that we all have um, a gifting towards a certain kind of leadership style that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and we've recently at Stone Ridge tried to recognize that and lean in and take advantage of some different types of leaders that are typical in the church. Um, and you still need a strategic leader, someone that's kind of cut out of the cloth of the apostles, who is all about what's our mission, where are we going, what's our vision, what are our underlying values that we got to hold fast to, and that strategic kind of mission driven leader, not necessarily authoritative, but very strategic. I could be authoritative. Um, that's a leadership expression we want here, but there's other leadership expressions we want. We want the leader that's cut out of the cloth of kind of like the prophet in the Bible, the person who's always waving the caution flag, saying like, wait a minute, we're getting off track, and not off track as far as strategy goes necessarily. Like the prophet's like, we're getting off track as far as, you know, our connection to the heart of God and staying true to our spiritual roots and foundations. And the prophet gives that kind of voice. I think it's funny. The phrase is funny because often the common phrase in our culture is the devil's advocate, and I think the prophet often plays that kind of role. It's kind of funny. Not very funny, a little funny. So
I'm laughing.
There's those two leadership expressions. There's the evangelist, the person that's always recruiting, that's always bringing new people in, that's never met a stranger, and there's that kind of leader. I think those people tend to be a little more authoritative for some reason. At least the people I know that have that kind of gifting, a lot of them have that, like, we're taking the hill, follow me, charging up the hill, follow me. There's the shepherding, the kumbaya leader, that that is always concerned about, is everyone being taken care of? Are we it's the servant leader, definitely. But it's also the team oriented leader, the empowerment oriented leader. I think that the shepherd is a huge part of church life, but not the only one. And I think for a long time, the shepherd was the only picture of church leadership, and there's all these others. And then the teacher, the detail oriented, like, this is what we need to do. This is the person who trains, who teaches in church life, in church language. It's often the discipler, but it's not just about teaching spiritual content. It's about making sure we've got the structures in place to go where we want to go. Is another.
So using your analogy, it's the idea that your one leader is saying, we're going to take that hill. The next leader is saying, come along so we can take that hill. The other leader is saying, okay, how are we caring for all these people that are going to take that hill?
Then you're limping. Can I help you?
Yeah. Or okay, you need to, let me help you walk through why this is difficult to take that hill. And then you've got the last leader that or one of the leaders that's going,
we're on the wrong hill.
Yeah. Wait a minute. Do you realize if we take this hill, we've got to worry about that hill over there? Or is this the right hill to cover right now? And then you have the other leader going, we need to make sure that all these people that are going to take this hill are trained up to take the hill, not just throw them in and hope they make it.
Yeah. Can we go over some battle formations?
Exactly.
Yeah, and so we're actually in the middle of restructuring our staff so that a core leadership team has these 5 pieces, and that we're doing the best job we can to accomplish all of that, and not expecting it from one leader or pastor of the church. I may value all those things, but I'm not necessarily, as the lead pastor here, I'm not going to be the guy that's great at all of them. And so we're trying to find people that are great at those things, put them together in a leadership team that's really going to take our church forward. So, and I think for for the value of the podcast and the listener, part of it is like, what cloth are you cut out of? And figure out, are you the strategist? Are you the devil's advocate? Or are you the recruiter evangelist? In whatever setting you are. This could be in a business setting, or setting of how you are around your friends, or in your circle, whatever. Are you the shepherd? Are you the caretaker? Or are you the trainer, teacher? What is the role that you excel at, and how can you lean into that and actually add more value by not trying to live somebody else's leadership role, but live yours. I did this little leadership what's the word? Kind of cohort, I guess. But I coach soccer. I brought some of my girls. We were off season. I brought some of my girls in that I'd seen like they have leadership potential, and I brought them in to my office setting, and we did some conversations about leadership, and it was fun to invest in them in a different way, but it was also eye-opening, because one of the best conversations we had was about something like this, and we didn't go into this depth necessarily, but we talked about different types of leaders, and it was, for some of them, it was the first time they'd ever heard, like they had the idea like leaders tell people what to do and people do it, but they hadn't thought through the nuances of different, there's authoritative leaders, and there's servant leaders, there's collaborative people, and there's, all these things. And all of a sudden they were recognizing in themselves that they could be a leader in the way that they were wired. And that was fun for me, to see their eyes open up to that. But I think all of us could benefit from that.
Well, and I think that it's a step towards, once I know what kind of leader I am, how does the kind of leadership I am play into a role of other leaders? Because you can't have a room full of teachers, because they'll all want to teach, but nobody will have any direction of where to go, and they won't necessarily care for where the team is.
So not only off track, how can I value what leadership piece I'm bringing, but how can I value the leadership piece that somebody else is bringing, and recognize it as different than what I'm bringing, but still valuable, because it's bringing its own piece of the puzzle in.
Well, and whether you're a leader of a small group of people, of a team, or whatever, you can look at it and you can determine who is the driver, who is the, and do I have all the aspects to really make this function and move in the direction you want it to go. It's real easy to get tied up in wanting to be people I agree with all the time. But when I find people that help me learn to disagree, then I begin to see, okay, we're not moving in the right direction, or I need to look at this from a different aspect.
Right.
As somebody who is authoritarian, they're really good at seeing where the organization is going and how to get there, and let's move. They're not really good at how we're getting there affecting the team below me. Right. And that's where your shepherd leader is going, wait a minute, this is great. I'm glad we're going in this direction, but if we don't take care of this, we're not going to get there.
If we don't slow down, we're going to lose half our people on the way there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's good stuff. So I hope as you listen, you're already thinking, what kind of leadership do I express, and what do I see in the people around me, and how can I value it in them? And maybe that becomes a conversation, and you can see that it's not just leadership, it's the way God wired us. And then it becomes not just a leadership conversation, but a faith conversation.
And if you don't know, ask.
Right.
Ask somebody, if you were to define me as a leader, what would that look like to you?
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, thanks for listening. Always great to have you along for the ride, and always great to have you along for the conversation, Scott.
We will see you next time.
All right.